If you could take your seat, we are about to start, please. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to Visualizing Data London and to the Microsoft Reactor, or to the Reactor YouTube channel, if you're watching online, anyone. It's a beautiful summer evening outside, yet you've chosen to be here, so thank you very much. Yeah, all right. Don't worry, you're safe in a dry environment. We're going to have two speakers today, Rusty and James, and then we're going to close with an announcement section. So if you had anything to share with the community, you're going to have an opportunity to do so. Before we start, we're going to have a word from our sponsor, Signal Noise. That is going to be delivered by Victor.
Hello, everybody. How many of you have heard of Signal Noise? Lots of you. All right, fine. So some of this will be a repeat of things that you've already seen, but I think it's just good to talk a little bit about what we do and why we sponsor this. So for us, we're very much interested in pushing in the way we think about not only data visualization, but how you work with data, and we're always looking for new people to work with, whether that's a freelancer or a contractor, a freelancer or a full-time person. So for us, sponsoring this is really important to get to know more of the community and actually talk a little bit about what we do very quickly. What we really pride ourselves on is thinking about how we reinvent how people see and use data. So we create experiences that persuade, inspire, and excite. And when we say see and use data, we very much think about not just quickly telling a story in rote ways, but how can you begin to manipulate that information in different ways? How can you learn new insights? How can you find new ways of interacting with stuff? It doesn't necessarily have to be on screen. It doesn't have to necessarily be in an environment. It needs to really be the right thing for the right job. One of the things that's really important to us is being very sector agnostic. So we work on everything from telling stories with the likes of The Economist, who is now our parent company, and working with The Guardian and Wired, through to thinking about how do you create new trading systems, how do you create new tools and experiences that allow someone to manage a billionaire's money. More recently, we're doing a lot more stuff in automotive. So what does the next 10 years of the in-car experience look like? All of that stuff is very much wrapped up in what we do. What we like to say is we're not experts in any one of these areas. We're experts in creating really great stories, really great products and experiences, and we partner with our clients very much and work very closely with them to create these things. We like to talk about our services having sort of three basic offers. Stories. How do you tell stories with a pre-existing data set, or how do you tell stories with data even if you don't have that pre-existing data set? So some of the stuff we've been doing recently is beginning to understand things like fan reaction in a stadium by recording fan reaction through audio and then visualizing that. So the client didn't actually have a data set for us to visualize. The first question was, how are we going to capture the data that will allow us to tell a story around an experience in that data? Products. We work in any environment where there's a high volume of information and a small amount of time to act on it, and how do you actually create services or products that people use day in, day out? So things like trading systems, things like reimagining how a factory will work, things like what does the interior of a car experience look like 10 years from now, which very much bleeds into our futures work. A lot of our clients come to us and say, what does our business look like 3 to 5 years from now? And we start doing some trends work and some innovation work to start to create not just marketing material, but ways to stretch their engineering teams and stretch their business teams to think about what artifacts, what kind of experiences could they or should they be selling, and how you actually begin to work with those things. So we work through a variety of different contexts. I'll show you very quickly a little show reel. so that in a visual barrage is a range of the types of things we've been working on. I think the most important thing for us and why we're here is we are hiring. If any of these titles sound like something you'd be interested in, please come and talk to me. We're also at the moment on the hunt for about 10 to 15 freelancers in the next couple months. So if it's something that looks along these lines that tickles your fancy, we're also looking for people who have data science backgrounds to look into some of the data sets that we're working on and work with designers. We're also looking for some people from a copywriting perspective to also help. So please come talk to me. There's a couple of other of us from Signal Noise that are also around. If they introduce themselves and say they're from Signal Noise, tell them what you do, tell them what you think you could maybe do with us, and let's set up a conversation in the next week or so to see if we can do anything together. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So now please help me welcome our first speaker, Rusty.
I'm not sure if that's working. That seems to be working.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Surasti. I'm a designer at Small Media Foundation. I'm not very big on talking about myself, so I'll just run through really quickly what I've done in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, I was surrounded by boxes, wrapping up my role as a design consultant for Embark, which is a sustainable transport and research lab in Bangalore. 4 years ago, I was at Windsor Castle looking at the Queen's private collection of Persian manuscripts, having taken a brief hiatus from design to do a master's in the history of art at the Courtauld, specializing in Persian art. 3 years ago, I was living out of a suitcase and starting my first job in London at Small Media Foundation, a media and research lab working with civil society organizations in the Middle East. 2 years ago, more boxes, more suitcases, more moves. But now I was helping organize a Data for Change workshop in Beirut. For those uninitiated, Data for Change is a workshop which brings together designers and developers along with human rights organizations to create advocacy campaigns. 1 year ago, I was wrapping up a project with Yemen Peace Project and Data for Change, working on Visualizing Yemen's Invisible War, which is a project we launched in December last year. The rest of this talk is going to be focused on how that project, Visualizing Yemen's Invisible War, came about, the processes involved, how we developed, and the final output. The original idea of the project came out of a 2016 Beirut-based Data for Change workshop, one that I attended as a participant. Just to give some background, in 2015, the Yemeni president was overthrown in a coup, and since then, there has been an ongoing civil war between a regime backed by an international coalition led by Saudi Arabia with backing from the US government against a North Yemeni militant group. If you really want all the details, you can visit the project link, which will be at the end of this talk, obviously. As I hope to explain later in the talk, we've done some really nice stuff to make the data more accessible. We worked with a data set that recorded the volume of airstrikes in Yemen and the kind of sites that were targeted, where it was located, and when it took place. The initial data set, the one we worked with during the workshop in 2016, recorded airstrikes from March 2015 to August 2016. That's nearly 18 months of endless airstrikes across the entire country. Initially, the project was quite slow to get off the ground. Following a lull after the 2016 workshop, we resurrected the project in late 2017. The project was to create an interactive story that maps the airstrikes in 3 major cities in Yemen and video interviews of residents in collaboration with the original organization who had brought the data set to us. But the project went through many embodiments. In March 2018, 6 months into reviving the project, our key partners, a journalist and filmmaker duo from Yemen, had to pull out due to personal reasons, which was unfortunate for them and really frustrating for us. This meant either axing the project all over again or rapidly finding a new partner, realigning with their timelines and objectives while ensuring work already done was not wasted, while still giving them enough room to take creative leadership. No biggie. Thankfully, the departing organization had left a breadcrumb trail in emails and half mentions that led us to a new partner organization fairly easily. In September 2018, we partnered with a DC-based advocacy organization dedicated solely to Yemeni affairs and the US-Yemen relationship. This was a stroke of luck. It did mean, though, that the entire idea of the project changed. Meanwhile, I'd gone through a dozen rounds of updating the data, codifying it, and cleaning it. In the early days, I struggled to keep up with the rapidly updating data set while managing the project. The first ever data set we got on our hands recorded the airstrikes from March 2015 to August 2016. If you remember, we resurrected the project in late 2017. At that point, the dataset had grown to 15,846 rows and detailed the airstrikes from March 2015 to December 2017. That's 28 months of airstrike data. Then we got another updated version that recorded airstrikes till March 2018. This meant we were working with 33 months of airstrike data. That's almost 3 years. You could have started and finished your undergraduate degree by then. And tragically, the conflict continued. While work on the project continued, the dataset was again updated to include records till August 2018. So that's an internship. In December 2018, when we published the story, the data had 18,714 rows and recorded the airstrikes till November 5, 2018. This means the final story was around 6 weeks shy of real-time data. To supplement the datasets, me and some colleagues scraped the geospatial coordinates for the governorates of Yemen, as well as the last recorded population levels. This meant we could now locate the airstrike data on a map over 3 years. In all honesty, we could have possibly stopped there. That in itself was a compelling story with the data that we had, but we didn't. It then located and added satellite imagery of specific sites that had been bombed. This was an important visual reminder to us, as well as the user, that the numbers in the dataset are about real people and real places. Whilst working on this and having partnered with the Yemen Peace Project in September 2018, they told us they would like to use this as a tool to lobby and inform representatives, readers, and key decision makers in DC ahead of legislation being presented at both the House and Senate that asks to put an end to the air campaign, or at least the end of US involvement in it. These motions were to take place between November and January of that year. We rapidly had a call to action and a really looming deadline. The false starts and ups and downs had ensured that at this stage, I didn't have a visual identity for the project or any substantial design work, let alone accurate visualizations. If you haven't noticed, I struggled with being the de facto dataset expert, managing the project while being the designer and working on the data visualizations. As a designer, I'm used to starting a sentence with, you know what would be a cool thing to try? And waiting for the project manager to say, yeah, let's try that, but is that scalable? Can we do it in the timeline? Why did you use that font? I had far too many of these conversations with myself and eventually got really tiring. So if you thought the talk might be about me showcasing some super cool high-tech visualizations, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. The talk is me mainly griping about how difficult this was. So at this stage, we had a chosen format, a long-form story. We had a clean and up-to-date data set. We had a call to action that asked its readers to write to their local representative, demanding action on the legislation, and obviously a deadline. But I was still not entirely convinced with the data visualizations that I had tried so far, and if any of them really worked with the direction we had decided to go in. I initially played around with raw graphs, an open source data visualization framework, and we had some really interesting outputs which had a lot of potential. I used a B-swarm graph to plot airstrikes categorized by targets. I was very drawn to this visual and how the volume of airstrikes was represented with the crowding of the dots. Then I used a Sankey diagram to show the governorates with a high number of airstrikes and which sites were targeted. With a bit of work, there could have been a story in there, but it wasn't the most inspiring option. We also struggled with the embedding of these visualizations and sorely missed the additional information that was hiding under each strand of that Sankey diagram or each dot of that B-swarm. It was also all very, very slow, and the data set was far too heavy for this platform to be a viable option. Plus, it was hardly something I could update every time the data set added a new row. I will unfortunately have to skim over a large part of the exploration process, mostly because of shoddy documentation, constantly overwriting the same file, and sin of spring cleaning gone wrong. Feel free to insert a classic design sprint montage of sketches, post-its, circles in red Sharpie, thoughtful pointing, thoughtful standing, thoughtful pencil biting, and end of scene. This is when I remembered Tableau. I'd barely used it. I was part scared to use it. This was the first time in earnest I was using the beast that Tableau really is, and there was a steep learning curve. Remember, we had quite a tight deadline. After the change in direction, the whole project had to be up and running in 3 months to be out before key legislation hit the Senate. I very quickly fell in love with Tableau. It was absolutely perfect for what we needed to visually achieve with our data set. The opaque interface became my friend, the constant signing in every time you have to save a file. Sure, I could get used to that. All I had to do now was to rapidly create a visualization that might help lobby senators and representatives to end the Yemeni war. No pressure. I was most keen to try out the coordinate data we had scraped, having struggled to initially merge with the main data set. There are 21 governorates in Yemen, with each of them at least having 5 different spellings. Slowly but surely, I managed to line everything up with the right coordinate and imported the data set into Tableau. And obviously, I wanted a map now. So after importing the data, fiddled with some settings, the most basic ones I imagine, and there we have it. That's playback of 3 years of airstrike data. The intensity of color is how recent it was, fading into white, and the size of circle representing the number of strikes in that particular location. Then I tried a more classic timeline, where each dot was the number of airstrikes categorized by target type, which were color-coded. It was absolutely wonderful seeing it come to life, being able to interact with the data, but also terrifying every time I remember what the data set was about. I then used a tree map to see what types of buildings or areas had the highest volume of air raids. It's quite good in telling me exactly that, but it takes a lot of space to give not enough information. You also have to remember that many of the airstrike targets are unknown, and the minute you see an unknown in a graph, interest wanes. But the number of unknown targets are so high that you surely can't ignore them. It's a fine balance getting that right. The way the narrative was progressing, it made sense for us to create a site where large amounts of data could be accessed, a single page that could give an overview of the data set, while still providing specifics. Something like this would be useful when talking to senators, representatives, and other officials. We really needed to be able to get our message across quickly and efficiently. This is when I decided to create a dashboard. This dashboard could be connected to a live sheet and be constantly updating, resolving the issue of the constantly growing data set. It would work to quickly give specific numbers regarding targets, number of airstrikes, and progression over the years. It could also be used to create dozens of new stories, a starting point for anyone looking for information about the airstrikes in Yemen. To get to the dashboard, I went back to the timeline. The first version was in the right vein, but I broke it down further. I created a granular timeline where each day was visible, the size of each square representing the number of air raids that day, and the color indicating the type of category. I decided that dashboard would be embedded at the end of this piece. If somebody was reading the story, they could select it from the navigation, or they would get there naturally if they didn't lose interest midway. If it was being used to lobby specific individuals, then even screen grabs of the right view could be useful to pique someone's interest. Within the narrative itself, I wanted to include smaller bite-sized graphics. These visualizations were largely 2 pages of content, which I distilled and placed into Excel, which then allowed me to make 2 visualizations. The first recorded the kinds of arms and armaments sold by the US and the financial gains involved with that. This visual was important to show how lucrative the conflict in Yemen was for the US economy, and that it wasn't just some naive, misplaced trust in coalition leaders. The second interactive graphic was a more detailed view of the number of airstrikes on civilian sites from 2015 to 2018, showing periods when the air raids were exceptionally aggressive. With these 2 mini visualizations in the main content, I could go back to the dashboard. In the dashboard, I included a summary number, added options where the user could select a year, filter by category, hover, and get detailed information, highlight specific incidents while still getting an overview, and then finally added annotations. Not the most elegant kind, but enough to add more context, highlighting specific events and moments which were covered in the press or when key decisions around the Yemen conflict were made. Once we had a working dashboard, I made a mobile and tablet version of the visualization with the relevant breakpoints, and we had a working story now. The story was finally built on shorthand, and once I managed to get enough of the data cleaned, the visual language began to take shape. The narrative was largely about US policy towards Yemen, and that detailed very much the visual language, graphics, colors, typeface, and photographs we ended up using. In terms of how the situation has progressed since the campaign, in December 2018, the Senate passed an important resolution to limit US support to the Saudi coalition. This got through the House of Representatives in April this year, but was then unfortunately, maybe predictably, blocked by Trump. This piece is going to be a work in progress, especially as the conflict continues. You can view the dashboard on the Tableau site here and the story there. If anyone has questions, I'll be happy to answer them after the talk. And if you want access to the workbook or the data set, I'll be happy to pass that on to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Surasti. If you can give us 5 minutes to set up the other speaker, we're going to continue. I think there's still some drinks and soft drinks in the back. We are out of pizza, unfortunately. So just give us 5 minutes, please.
Huh? Yeah, it's right here.
All right, if I can ask everyone to take back their seat. All right, please help me welcome our second speaker, James.
Hey, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Yeah. Okay. I can't tell. So my talk is on the joy of analog, although it's really about one specific thing. I'm an interaction designer and a service designer by trade, profession. And so my daily sort of things I do are all very digital. So I've always had this strong desire to keep things analog, to do other things. So in my life, other things that I enjoy are old cars. I've owned a couple. The analog feeling of them and the driving experience is always good. No computers. You can understand them if you take them apart. Those kinds of things. You can pretty much fix anything with a screwdriver or a hammer. The other thing I'm interested in is modular synthesizers, which are generally all analog, but there are some digital things in it, but the actual process is a very analog thing. It's very tactile, twisting knobs and those kinds of things. I don't really have any interest in making music. It's questionable whether or not, yeah, music any other way. It's questionable whether or not it's music. It's mostly noise. So the main part of the story for this talk starts, I think, in about 2010 when I went to see a show by, and I'm going to pronounce it wrong, Ligia Pape, who's a Brazilian artist. And she makes these things with thread. So that's a big installation. But the things that I was more interested in were these drawings. And they're obviously done with a ruler, probably on a drawing board. They're sort of A4 in size. And I really liked them because they just felt, sort of like the effort to make them. And they're just, the really interesting thing was sort of like the precision, but then also the imprecision of just the slight variances. So I thought, well, what can I do? Can I try and do something like that? I'm quite lazy, so I wasn't going to be doing it with a ruler. So I thought about making something that would do it. So I made this drawing machine. It's all laser cut. It has 2 stepper motors that rotate at different speeds. You stick a pen on the other end, and it makes intricate things. It was all wobbly and a bit cranky, which is kind of what I wanted. I would have liked to have aimed for something a bit more precise, but that's how it all came out. A later version was a bit more complicated, but that's the only video I've got. So it makes this kind of thing, which is quite nice. It's basically just by changing the direction, so you can rotate the motors at different speeds and different directions. You can make them move in sort of sine wave patterns, starting and stopping and stuff like that. Yeah, so you get all these nice, I think I sort of achieved what I set out to do. But I actually didn't invent anything new. This is something that had been made before, as I found out afterwards, really. There was a thing called, this is the drawing apparatus by a guy called Robert Hauser, which is 2 turntables and this sort of pentagraph-type mechanism. There are other things, this cycloid drawing machine. So this middle bit rotates and then drives these other gears around the outside, and you get these sort of spirograph kind of things. There's an amazing guy called James Nolan Gandy who makes these really beautiful machines, and in themselves they're quite, they're works of art, which is a harmonograph. So this thing in the middle, I think, rotates, and then these things are just pendulums that move around. He also makes one which is a bit more like my one, but obviously way, way better. It's just, beautiful thing. This one, the arms rotate, and the platter in the middle also rotates. And they make these really beautiful things. And he sells these, so you can buy them. And they're not actually that expensive considering how wonderful they are. And then, so I made the drawing machine, I sort of forgot about it. And then a few years later, I went to a talk by a guy I know called Andrew Duff, who makes these amazing, not quite sure what he calls them, but basically they're images and they're drawn on a thing called a Vectrex, which is this, which is an old arcade machine which you can modify. A Vectrex is basically a CRT, so it's a thing that shoots an electron beam towards the front, and it draws a path, like an oscilloscope, like a TV, but a much more basic version. You know, so with that, if you're moving, the only controls you have are X and Y. So, for instance, if you wanted to draw a circle, you'd draw a sine wave and a cosine wave together, and you'd end up drawing that. Vector displays are used in old arcade machines as well. And I think what's important, actually, these things, it doesn't do them justice at all seeing them on here. You've got to see them on the actual thing, really, because they kind of glow. In the same way, if you play an arcade machine, if you play the original, it's so much more visceral. Quite like this as well, as a tangent. This is Quake being played on an oscilloscope. So that sort of XY thing, drawing stuff together with the synthesizer stuff that I'm doing. So I should point out these, I missed a very important point. These are all made from a modular synthesizer. So he's sending oscillators and noise into this to generate this. That's all that's generating those. So I thought about, well, I'd quite like to make the drawing machine again, but I don't want to make something. I think I should look at something that exists already. So plotters were the obvious thing to look at. They go back to like the 60s. They're either really massive and expensive, but they also do flatbed plotters, which are a bit smaller. That sort of takes A3 sheets of paper. I think it's kind of interesting thinking about the plotter in terms of the timeline of when they were made. They were made at a time when your computer was, a terminal that you were typing text into. So actually seeing anything with any fidelity was quite rare. So outputting onto a plotter, to actually see stuff was the thing to do. Sort of around the same, the obvious other things apart from plotter would be a line printer, which is just a glorified typewriter, dot matrix printers, laser printers in the 70s were massive and huge. So I decided to buy a plotter. So I went and bought this, not this specific one, but it is the same model, Roland DXY 1300. You can get them off of eBay. They're range from anything from 50 quid to 250, 300. They're quite cool. They take multiple pens. They date back to the 80s. The equivalent price now for one of these would be about £5,000, which is, but if you think there's no other option at that time to actually print out anything with any fidelity. So I bought one, and I started playing with it. Sort of went a bit wrong at first, sort of learning, having to make sure the paper's flat. And then, sort of making more and more stuff, getting through things. This was something I made for a friend, which is a visualization of a track from an album he made. So it's sort of like a vinyl record, but it's the waveform spiraling in. I ended up with the house covered in these plots, which is quite good when your friends come around and it's like, oh yeah, you can have that. I randomly, I had some chest pain once, and they decided to send me a paramedic. And the paramedic came along and gave me an ECG and this plot. And then as she was walking out, she was like, I like that, so I gave her one of those. Sort of, it was a swap, basically, of a plot. There are other people doing stuff. On Twitter, if you search for Plotter Twitter, there are some amazing people doing some great stuff. This is a guy called Michael Fogelman. This one on the left is the first 5 seconds of Donkey Kong. So each one of these little sparkline things is a memory address, and then it's over 5 seconds. The thing on the right is a protein ribbon diagram. So I've actually bought one of these ones on the left from him. The thing that you have to really understand is the quality of the lines, actually, when you see the physical object. There's a guy called, I'm going to say this so wrong, Arjan van der Mee? Yeah. And he makes these really lovely sets of kind of symbols. So each one of those is a binary number. So it's interpreting the ones and zeros, the bits of a binary, of a byte. And again, you kind of have to see the quality of the lines. Paul Rickard's this guy. So he does lots of stuff with different colored ink. So he uses CMYK, so typical kind of printing ink. And so you get these lovely color mixes and stuff. So it's kind of interesting with the plotting, it is about the physical nature of the thing that you're drawing on. And this guy is a guy called Seb Lee Delisle, and he made this thing called a mindfulness machine. So it basically draws out one of those patterns, and then it colors it in. So it's quite something just to watch it. When you're printing stuff on when you're plotting stuff on the plotter, it's quite mesmerizing. So going to the why plot stuff. It's sort of about the mistakes and the errors that happen. So on this plot, all of these are mine. You can see where the pen has hit the paper here. It makes like a splodge. And that's dependent on how long it's been running for, or if it's been up in the air for a while and goes back down again. It's the inconsistencies in the lines. So you have some control over this based on how fast the pen moves. So getting the speed of the pen correct is a balance of, do you want it to take like an hour to print out, to plot, or do you want it to do it in 10 minutes? One of the things is choosing the media. I tend to do everything on black because obviously you've got any choice of color of paper. So this is like a silver pen. And again, you can see all of the inconsistencies. Playing around with pens and paper is probably the most fun. Just plotting stuff is a challenge in itself. So this basically started running out as they got to here. Because it's like a shaky pen with a ball in it, with a ball valve. And they like to be pressed down. And it just starts to run out. Again, this is with an oil pen. So as the pen goes down onto the paper, it makes these really lovely sort of splats around everywhere. Like over here. That's nice. Some thoughts about if you are inspired to do some plotting for your next data viz project. What can you buy? I'm not on commission or anything here. There's a thing called an axi drawer, which is quite cool. That's like the most obvious modern version of it. It's new. You don't have to worry about it. It can take any size of pen you want, so a big fat marker or something very thin. An axi drawer. To plot to it, you use Inkscape. You probably don't want to use Inkscape for anything else because it's horrible. But you basically open up, you save your SVG, stick it into Inkscape, and it'll draw something. These are about, I think the A3 version is about 500 quid. There's a little drawing robot called Linus, which has an iOS app, and you can make it draw stuff. That's pretty lovely. It's only it can only print about this big, though. It's not a lot of scope for anything. You could buy an old plotter like I did. The one on the left is a Roland DXY. They're all basically the same. They have various different features, but they all work the same. The fancy top model has an electrostatic bed, so your paper gets stuck down, so you don't have to worry about holding it down. The one on the right is an A1, which is a DPX model. That's A1, and it's a beast. It weighs about 40 kilos or something. I'm tempted, but I'm not quite sure where I'm going to put it. So you can get those for anything from like 50 quid up to 250 quid, depending on whether or not it comes in a box. A more rare thing in the UK is a HP 7475. This works a bit differently to the previous ones in that it moves the paper in and out and the pen moves across. There are various challenges with connecting, or with plotting stuff. They use a serial connection, so you need a USB to serial adapter, and you need the correct cable to connect it up. If you get the wrong one, then you'll have issues. They talk a language called HPGL, which is actually really dead simple. So this is what you send over serial. So it's sort of like initialize, select pen 1, go to point the coordinate 500, 500, put the pen down, move to 1000, 1000, pen up. So it's a bit like logo or something like that. It's probably not, it's useful to know how it works, but probably not. You don't want to write stuff, but maybe you do. Inkscape again has which is different to the AxiDraw, but it has a way of saving HPGL, so you can draw stuff and export as HPGL. There's a Python library called Chipotle, which allows you to output stuff. That's useful. That allows you to just like write commands. It has some basic shapes. I wrote a library for it, which has basic shapes, outputs SVGs and HPGL, and does some optimization of path, the order that the paths are being drawn, and connects stuff up if they need to be connected up. If you're into processing, there's HPGL for that, so you just output it like you output an SVG or a PDF. Preparing your artwork for plotting is also interesting. So you can't do the thing on the left. So if you go into Illustrator and you draw 2 circles, it won't do that. It will do that. It's quite difficult to get shapes on top of shapes, because if you just did the normal thing which you do, which is just to take one away from the other, you'll end up with this going over twice, for instance, because you'll have this as a shape and this as a shape. If you're coding stuff, so if you're using processing or Python or something, the direction of the lines is important. Not really, it's important if you don't want your plot to take hours. So if you plot this, obviously it's going to draw here, lift up the pen and go back down here and draw here. And ideally you want to minimize the time that the pen's up. So ideally you write code that does something like that. You just swap the ends of the lines. Or you use some kind of optimization in the library, which is what my library does. The other thing is the order of the lines. Obviously, if you're drawing a line over here, and then you're drawing a line over here, it's having to move backwards and forwards all the time. So ideally, you want to have the order. Yeah, this would take forever because it's going backwards and forwards, but that would draw a bit more efficiently. If you've got curves made up of individual lines, then it's going to draw here and go up and go back down again, which is going to take time, but you're also going to have dots all the way along where the pen keeps on going down on the paper. So essentially, most of it is about time. You want to minimize that as much as possible. If you've got an old plotter, then getting the pens, they're quite specific. You can't just put any pen in. You need a pen like this. You can buy them, but they get quite expensive, and the options for ink and stuff is a bit boring. You can refill them, but it's not that great. So you can 3D print adapters, which is quite cool. I've had some success with that. It's varied, especially whether or not the actual thing picks up the pen. It can be difficult. You'll end up with lots of pens, for sure. I think that was within the first 2 weeks of me having the plotter. They also run out amazingly quickly. I never finish a pen in real life. I always lose it before I use it. But with something like one of the gel pens, you can actually see the thing going down as it's plotting over the course of half an hour. If you want to, so stuff, if you want to understand any more, there's a great website called DrawingBots, which has various different resources on it. It has some tools if you fancy. There's some nice things which convert images into things you can plot, so bitmaps into things you can plot, and then things that just make lovely generative art. There's some ideas about pens that you might want to use, because it is quite important what pens you use. One of the things with pens, the other thing with pens, it's amazing how fine our motor skills are to make a pen draw very smoothly and consistently. As soon as it's a robot moving up and down, it just doesn't work. There's a Discord where there's lots of people chatting about plotters. It's very niche, I think. And there is a thing, so a few months ago we started exchanging postcards with each other, which is quite nice. It's just one of the things, it's just a lovely physical object. So we're now on our third swap. And yeah, just look at Plotter Twitter. That's a good place for people talking about plotters. So why not consider plotting for your next data viz project? I have got some examples of my plots, but they're in the other room. So grab me afterwards if you're really that inclined. So yeah, that's plotting.
Thank you. That was great. Do we have any questions for James that you're happy to?
Some of the latest pictures you showed, do they come from data, those plottings, or they look like they come from a data set or not? Is anything analog, or is everything analog?
There wasn't anything from data that I showed, I don't think. There was like the protein stuff. I guess there's the Nintendo emulator. Yeah.
All right. And what's the biggest plotter you can buy? What's the biggest picture you can?
So the biggest one you can buy, you'd have to buy it second. Well, I think there are new ones which are really huge, but they cost like thousands.
Right.
If you wanted to go big and cheap, then you can get like the big A1 one that I showed, which is about 250, 300 quid, if you can find it on eBay. But yeah, it's big and heavy.
Thank you.
More questions for James?
On that one with the song, with the sound wave,
Yeah.
so did you have to make that in Illustrator and then feed it through as SVG, or is that...
No, I
how does that
wrote
work?
some code in processing that just took in a raw wave file and then drew the spiral.
That sounds much easier than drawing
Yeah.
it, yeah.
Hi. You talk about, when you're moving the pen up and down, you want those efficient lines.
Yeah.
Is there like good noise that you like in the plot and like bad noise, bad mistakes? Is there like a kind of things that show up your bad kind of,
That's a really good question.
your bad composition of your file that you get? Plotter Twitter aficionados go, oh, see what you're
Yeah, I'm
doing.
not sure. It's a good question about like what's deliberate and what's not, and what's just a happy accident. Obviously, I think one of the really nice things is that you're taking something that is essentially almost is perfect in terms of a digital file usually, and then you're putting it through a filter of this physical pen. There's the movement of the plotter plus the pen not being really that precise or not having a consistent line. I'm not really sure. It's probably the thing I probably like is the inconsistent. The line isn't just completely perfect. It's got those differences in the width very slightly. Or on top of that, if you use, you can use it to your advantage as well. So if you use a big marker, and then as you're going over a line again and again, then obviously you get where they overlap and stuff like that.
I am fascinated by the correspondence using postcard.
Yeah.
Could you tell us more about that? How did it start, or what kind of contents do you exchange? Or?
Okay, so it started on the Discord, so we were discussing it. I suggested it, and then someone else started running it. So we have a theme every month. It's only the third time, so I'm not talking about it like it's gone on for years. We have a theme every month, and then everybody who wants to do it puts themselves into a list, and then you randomly get assigned someone else. And then we just swap. It's good because you get all the different styles that people do. This one is particularly cool because this is with I think it's watercolor. So in the holder is a brush that then moves into ink or paint and then moves and draws. So yeah.
More questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, so we're going to conclude with a quick announcement section. The first one's going to be from our meetup, which is we're always looking for speakers. So if speaking at this meetup is something you would like to do, there's this link that I'll also post into the meetup page, so you don't have to write it down. And you can tell us about your talk, what you're proposing, and then we'll try our best to fit you into one of our next events. I think the next announcement is going to come from Piero.
But I actually taking this chance to do something else, and it's thanking someone that doesn't get enough credit for organizing these things, and it's Zdeněk there, which I think we should all give him a good round of applause. It's a third meetup that I come here, and I always walk away really inspired. Now I feel like I want to buy a plotter, which is going to be problematic. I'm going to keep it really quick because it's advertising and you're not here for that. But one thing we're all here is we like to explore and interrogate data in different ways. And we like to hear how people have done it different ways, practitioners and so on. So if that's the case, maybe this could be for you. And this is ENCODE. It's a conference that is happening in 19 and 20 of September in London. And it focuses on data journeys on design, journalism, and education. It will have more than 30 practitioners from all around the world showcasing their projects from the likes of Territory Studio, Signal Noise, Pitch Interactive, to practitioners like Valentina De Filippo, Stephanie Pozovec, Andy Kirk. We'll have Financial Times, Bloomberg. So it's a really good opportunity to share, debate what's happening with visualizing data. And on top of that, to thank this Zdeněk to give us an opportunity to to promote this event. We want to give a little bit of a discount to go and buy tickets. If you put this code in on encode.info, you can get 15% off on the tickets. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else has? I can also probably post it on the meetup page as well. Yeah. Yeah, all good? All right, everyone else? Anybody? Events, projects, jobs, thoughts, opinions? We had a heckler last time, that was exciting. Nothing happened today yet. And anyone but Michael. All right, no one? Great. I would like to thank my good friend Asim, without whom we wouldn't be able to be here. The next thing that's going to happen is we still have some drinks in the back, so feel free to hang around and have a conversation, and we'll slowly move to the Fox, which is a pub just 2 doors down if you get out of the building and turn to the right. It's just very, very close. All right. Thank you all very much for coming.